Excited for another fight in Canada, Elias?
Yeah, excited. Undefeated in Canada and looking to keeping that going. And, every time I step in the octagon, I don't fight only just for myself or my team, but also for my country.
Going up against a guy like Derek, right? You've already spoken about you want to kind of jump into this top 10. What do you want to do against Derek? Because he's a very aggressive fighter as well.
Yeah, he's an aggressive fighter. He's a top 10 for a reason. He's been a staple in the division. I think it's a great opportunity. In many ways, I think our styles couldn't be more opposite in regards to, he's someone that, is aggressive right off the bat, where I'm more cerebral and look to find ways to win. He lives by the sword and dies by the sword, and that's something, it's going to be probably a tough first 5 minutes. But from there, I'm going to show him the difference between chess and checkers.
Do you look at his history of fights and how experienced he might be, and you look at yourself and you try and learn from his past fights and on how you could be a little bit your own fighter?
Well, I think if you look at one Derek Brunson fight, you've seen them all. He in a previous life was a sprinter in high school and college, and I think that obviously translates. But I'm going to show him the difference between a sprint and a marathon.
Do you feel like you're well prepared for his sort of aggressive style? Some of your recent, or not recent fights, but past fights, Thiago Santos, one of the most wild fighters in the UFC. Eric Anders coming forward, hits hard. Similarities maybe.
No, definitely. And I would argue, like, again, I was able to go pretty close decision with someone like Thiago Santos. And the only other loss I really had was against Brad Tavares, who, I beat him in every single stat if you want to look at it that way. But, this is my 20th professional fight. We have the same amount of wins, essentially, after I get my hand raised, but he has a lot more losses, a lot more KO losses. And, I've saved myself up in regards to all my chips in the wars and the battles, being the smarter fighter. And I'll enter the cage smarter, I'll enter the octagon smarter, and I'll exit it smarter.
You're on a bit of a winning streak. Does that change your energy, your motivation?
Well, yeah, I think there's a deep contrast in between the two of us. I'm on a 3-fight winning streak, and after Saturday, he'll be on a 3-fight losing streak. So if you just look at that component, he has a much more on his shoulders. Obviously, I want to enter the top 10 and stay there, but he's fighting for his job, and I still got to look at that as a desperate man is a dangerous man. But he's been fighting like he's desperate for quite some time, right? And if you look at his wins or his losses, it's in the first round, and part of that is again that sprinter mentality. He fights very emotional. Fights start about 50-50, obviously, in regards to each opponent has distance, each opponent has their barrier, and he almost feels compelled out of emotion to break that barrier. And, you've seen that in the fights where, like the Robert Whittaker one, where he had him and then he just exerted everything. Or if you look at the last one with Israel Adesanya, he respected... He respected Israel striking so much that he desperately looked for a takedown. He's an emotional fighter, where I use my brain.
Brunson told us that trading down in Florida now at Hard Knocks with Henry Hoof, obviously a really good striking coach, he's tightened up some of those holes on the feet, keeping his chin high perhaps. What do you make of that?
Sure, but I would argue, like, again, his experience obviously goes a long way, but there's the old statement, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and I think that's very much the case. If you've seen one Derek Brunson fight, you've seen them all. But again, with that being said, I respect him, both as an athlete and as a mixed martial artist, and, he's a great wrestler, but, I've competed against great wrestlers before. You have someone like Trevor Smith, who's a D1 wrestler, where opposed to Derek Brunson's D2, and a lot of his wrestling kind of goes out of the window the more it doesn't work. He obviously has a high defense rate, but part of that is his ability to kind of just be wild, he's very strong, but so am I. So again, I'm going in there with a game plan that I think I know is just battle tested, because going into the octagon for the 11th time, this will be my 8th fight against a southpaw. So in many ways, there's a blueprint that I have. My only 2 losses are against regular stanced individuals.
You laid it out a bit there. It seems that you guys are in such different places kind of in your career right now. Do you think you kind of have the mental edge? Like, it seems like, listening to you right now, you know exactly who you are, what you need to do and everything. He's switching camps. He maybe is a little confused about what he needs to do. Does that give you an advantage going in?
100%. And again, like that added pressure. I'm going in there with 3 wins. Arguably, again, depending on what you scored the Derek Brunson fight, not Derek Brunson, the Brad Tavares fight. What's it called? I only have 1 loss against someone that's now fighting for the title, and I'm the only real person to ever take him to a decision.
How do you think Thiago does against John Jones?
Obviously, the better he looks, the better I look. So we'd be really excited for him to, shock the world. But beyond that, he's a sweetheart. Beyond that, he's a sweetheart and a great human being. It's always an honor, and same thing with Derek after Saturday. It's an honor to step in the cage with my fellow competitors.
Hi, Elias. Just a few for you here.
Hey, man.
Nice to see you. So we both know you've developed among some fans maybe not the most exciting fighting style in their perspective, but Luke Thomas has praised you as having one of the most entertaining Twitter games and Twitter profiles in the game. How important is it for you to show off your personality and have that presence online, especially when some fans might not hold your fighting style in the highest prestige?
Well, I would argue again, there's many different types of fighters out there, and there's many different types of fans. I definitely have my own ability inside the octagon and out to showcase who I am. I wouldn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a need. It's more of a, just me being me, and anyone's welcome to join my journey.
It still seems to me, having talked to Derek Brunson a little while ago, that no one you fight you always seem a little underestimated. What is it? Why is it, do you think, that all your opponents underestimate you?
Again, because I think a lot of them kind of have, the very boxed in look at in regards to martial arts, where I like to paint outside the box. And, maybe not everyone appreciates it, but those that do, I appreciate them. And I think with Derek, again, he has a very set style and a very set person in regards to the fact that he's been doing martial arts even before he did mixed martial arts in regards to wrestling. So he has a style and he threw some boxing on it, but it is what it is in that capacity. I think I'm going to keep doing me.
Last one for you here. We know how important your hair is to you. I'd love it if you could rank these three fighters based on their hair: Clay Guida, Brian Ortega, Roy Nelson.
Amazing. Okay, so, well, again, obviously, someone like Clay Guida is a GOAT, and he's been around forever, and the fact that he doesn't put it in a ponytail most of the time is just maddening. Again, one of the big hurdles in regards to my Thiago fight was the fact that my hair came undone, and from then on, I was like, braids, always braids, no more man bun. But, I'd say, there's a different type of hair class for everyone, so it's more like the idea. Clay Guida's like the wild, and obviously Brian Ortega is slick and smooth, and big country. What's it called? If less is more, think how much more is, and I'm talking about size.
UFC did a profile on you the other day where it said this is the second chapter of your career, of your UFC career. What's the distinction between the first half and now moving forward?
Well, there's a couple of things in milestones. This is my 5th year in the UFC. I just celebrated that April 16th when I won the Ultimate Fighter. And I think it's in June-ish, I'll be celebrating my 10th year in martial arts. So, it's a milestone in the sense of, a man-child at 21 stepped into a gym and had the audacity to, go from fan to top 10.
Now, you did get a late start in MMA compared to some other athletes. At 30, even though you're young in the sport, do you feel the need to accelerate the process any? Because we all say your prime kind of comes to your end in your early 30s.
Well, again, the larger someone is, usually the longer of a career that they have. Speed goes first, not power. You can obviously look at the example of someone like George Foreman at 40, winning the title. And then statistically speaking, in regards to heavyweights, the median age in my weight class is still 35, and the guy that I'm fighting is 5 years older than me. So again, I'm still the younger guy in the middleweight division, and I think part of, obviously there's pros and cons in regards to starting so late. I don't have any of the wear and tear that some of the damage in regards to injuries, and I started as a blank canvas. Derek Brunson, he resorts back to that wild. He resorts back to that, wrestling and desperation, where, I try to be as cerebral as possible and find ways to win. And I think my record speaks for itself. At the end of this week, I'll be 18-2.
A few months ago, George St. Pierre retired. You're right now the most accomplished and one of the longest tenured Canadians in the UFC. Do you feel like you're carrying the flag right now for Canadians, that you are the biggest name for Canada in the UFC?
Obviously, even just saying that out loud or hearing that out loud is obviously, I pinch myself because, again, I started as a fan first. Like I said, I'm very appreciative of everyone that follows my journey. Obviously, when I step in the octagon, I do it as a proud Canadian, and looking forward to taking that picture with that flag afterwards.
We just saw Roy McDonald have his fight last weekend. He spoke a lot after the fight. I'm sure you saw his comments. He'll be back in the gym, I guess, next week training for his fight against Neely Gracie. But what did you just make of those comments? Have you seen anything in the gym from Rory that maybe makes it feel like he is struggling internally with doing this sport right now?
I don't think it was necessarily struggling. I think obviously the confusion of having a draw, the confusion of going. The man just went through a 5-round fight, right, against a very gritty fighter. It was an honest and raw, post-fight cage, and I'd say every fighter goes through that in some capacity, and not necessarily in regards to in the aspect of necessarily the religion aspect, etc., etc. But I think we all go through ebbs and flows. I've talked about it in with my coaches, where sometimes I'll have the best session in like a week, and then the next day I'm constantly needing a little bit of reassurance, but then I'm like, oh yeah, you were there for the whole camp. It went amazing. You know what I mean? So we tend to be, it's my belief that we're all different shades of pink monkeys, trying not to convince ourselves we're not pink monkeys. And there's a lot of just internal thought that we kind of have to have. And, it's therapeutic in some capacity. It's part of the process. And that's also has to probably be attached to our fight or flight. You know what I mean? If, as one of my coaches would say, comfort kills performance. And if you're not, a little uncomfortable, it's probably going to hurt your performance.
If you're successful at this fight, as you clearly feel that you're going to be, who would you like next?
I'm not going to look past Derek. And as I've said in my last fight, I might be fighting, a tough individual, and I will be fighting a tough individual outside. But my next fight is not against one man; it's against the stigma of medical cannabis. And I'm looking to continue my fight for a therapeutic use exemption to set precedent not only for myself but all other athletes, and that includes not only the UFC, everyone under the WADA code.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Cheers.